Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in my place this afternoon to add my voice to the debate on the government's bill promoting the buying and selling of local food in Ontario, Bill 36, the Local Food Act. I am generally supportive of this bill, but I am disappointed by how weak the bill actually is.
Weak.
At the end of the day, though, it is better to have this bill than to continue to live in its absence. If this bill passes second reading, amendments can be made in committee to make this bill more effective. And the first amendment I support comes from the member from Nepean Carleton, our education critic, to teach the importance of local food in our elementary schools. My comments on this bill will be critical but constructive. Bill 36 fails to live up to expectations. I have three major concerns with this bill. Number one, input from key stakeholders has been ignored, and so the bill is ineffective. Number two, this bill does not take an incentive approach to helping this important industry, but takes a restrictive approach by mandating requirements to be met by stakeholders. And number three, this bill does not address the real issues that are holding the local food industry back, such as overregulation and restrictive new laws governing food production in Ontario. First of all, the public, producers and consumers have been waiting a long time for the government to come forward with a comprehensive strategy to help and highlight local food. Many stakeholders have been working with the government for years on this issue. Stakeholders such as the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, the Holland Marsh Growers Association, and the Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association have told the government what needs to be in this bill. Bill 36, we now know that much of their effort was futile because this government didn't take their advice. These organizations and others like them are close to the ground on this issue and need to be heard. Respect for local food producers begins with showing them that government has been listening. Bill 36 falls short on that, and I will expound on that a little later. The Premier, who is now doing double duty as Agriculture Minister, has touted the government's action on this file and promised this Local Food Act to be one of the first pieces of legislation her government brings forward this session. Well, I think it was a rush job. This bill is not a comprehensive strategy to support local food. It is a public relations plan. Unfortunately, more often than not, this government shows itself to be all talk and no action. As the bill's preamble states, Ontario has robust and resilient local food systems, a highly productive agricultural land base, a favourable climate and water supply, efficient transportation and distribution systems, and knowledgeable, innovative farmers, food processors, distributors, retailers, and restaurateurs. It goes on to say our local food systems diversity reflects the diversity of its people. This needs to be celebrated, the bill says. Well, I submit, Mr. Speaker, we need to do a heck of a lot more than celebrate our favourable attributes as Ontarians. We need to change the way our agriculture industry is treated by government. Instead of pandering and positioning, we need an act we can actually sink our teeth into. Secondly, this bill fails to give the local food industry incentives. Bill 36 talks about setting targets and meeting goals, putting metrics to measure success by. This is all well and good, but the message sent to farmers is you're not working hard enough, and to consumers is you're not buying enough. Also, mandating that all government organizations buy local food is not a reasonable solution because, at least in the short term, it will drive up the food costs for those government organizations and departments. We simply cannot afford any increases in government overhead at the moment. Instead, we should promote local food to other people who can afford it. As a start, we should explore the feasibility of offering incentives such as tax breaks for producers and consumers. We could waive the provincial sales tax paid by local food processors. To help make the price of local food competitive, we could waive all sales taxes usually paid by or passed on to the consumer. These are just two examples of providing incentives to making producing and consuming local food more attractive. Thirdly, there are some pieces of legislation and regulations that in fact interfere with or discourage the availability of local food to local consumers. In the last 15 years, over 100 small community abattoirs have gone out of business in Ontario. The main reason is the high cost of upgrading facilities that is mandated by the many new regulations that have been forced upon these small businesses. In effect, we have regulated these abattoirs out of business. There is now a shortage of abattoirs across Ontario. This has reduced the availability of local beef, pork, lambs and goats to local consumers. And it has increased the cost of slaughtering several-fold, which is passed on to the local consumer. This increased cost discourages the purchase of local meat by local consumers. We are so over-regulated right now that the abattoir owner can be charged with a host of crimes. The farmer can be charged with a host of crimes. And even the local consumer can be charged with a host of crimes. The crime is trying to sell, process, or buy local food. I have an example in my community where Major Mark Tyson was taken to court and charged by the Minister of Agriculture and Food for the terrible crime of buying a pig from a farmer and taking it home and killing it. That is illegal according to the Food Safety and Quality Act. And Mark defended himself in court for 2 years and was fighting it on his constitutional right to be able to choose the food he wants to eat. The MNR that was taking him to court, or the Crown Attorney, decided to drop the charges at the last minute. What a waste of taxpayers' dollars. What a discouragement of local food consumption. That is very, very wrong. That is a bad law, and we need to fix things like that. More recently, Anthony Suzin was selling lambs to community members, and the MNR were out on the road with their cameras in black-tinted window cars, taking pictures of him and his customers, and they've charged him with the terrible crime of selling lambs. This kind of thing has to stop. It discourages local food consumption.
Terrible.
Government has gone overboard with regulations, and those are two great examples of just what overboard means. I recommend that we review all regulations that pertain to small abattoirs and farmers in the business of producing, processing, and selling local meat to local consumers. Regulations should be modified, streamlined, or even eliminated with the objective of making local meat more readily available to local consumers and improving the business environment for abattoirs and farmers. We should encourage and allow local consumers to buy meat animals directly from farmers. There would be a willing seller and a willing buyer. The buyer would inspect the animal and accept it as safe food. The buyer would take the animal or carcass to his home property for processing. This has been the culture and tradition and trade of mankind since agriculture was first practiced. Another area where local food can be and should be promoted is at farmers' markets, country fairs, church suppers, community suppers and celebrations, and similar events. These local food-centered events are a wonderful chance to celebrate local food for farmers, cooks, processors, and consumers to meet and to talk about and eat Ontario's delicious foods that we grow. We must again review all regulations with the objective of making these local foods at these community events more available. No more pouring of bleach on sandwiches at church suppers by the health unit. Local food in Ontario can only flourish if local farmers and small business and small abattoirs can flourish. Small businesses in the local food production chain need our help, and consumers need to be proud of their local food producers, whereas now they're not sure why local food is not available everywhere. Mr. Speaker, this bill deserves our support, if only to get it into committee where we can temper its flaws. I will be voting for this bill, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I am a farmer, and I used to sell my products at the Carp Farmers Market. That was one of the most enjoyable times of my life. I happen to like being a salesman. I've always loved being a farmer. We had beef cattle, and I could sell you a roast beef that, you know, you would think you were getting the most wonderful roast beef in the world. And last week I would have been mad as hell at that flea-bitten old cow. And I learned that from my father. He could take the nastiest old cow in the world, and by the time when the guy came to buy it, he'd dress it up like she was just like the Queen of England. Of course, it was always worth more. But food, I think, is an invaluable thing. When you can buy food directly from the farmer, there's great value there. So we should never complain about the price of food. And I thoroughly enjoy dealing directly with consumers, giving them advice on what good food was, where it came from, how we cared for the animals, how we fed them, how we kept them healthy. And people understood that farmers genuinely cared for their animals, and if they weren't well cared for and healthy, they wouldn't have been good, healthy food. So that everything goes together. Good management is being a humane caretaker of your animals, properly fed, properly housed, look out for their health, and all of those good things. And in the end, we got wonderful, wonderful food to deliver right to the consumer. I remember at the Carp Farmers Market, one of the greatest events I had, it was one of the first times I actually had anything to do with politicians. So we had this feature day, and it was beef day, so we decided we'd have a cow chip throwing contest. And of course, the guests of honors that threw the cow chips were the politicians, so I used to have great fun at the expense of politicians. And of course, invariably, you know, the highest ranking politician, who happened to be the mayor of Ottawa, Jackie Holzman, won. And I got to hand it to her. She was a real man, because she didn't want to, she turned down the gloves. She just grabbed the chip and threw it. So it was a wonderful experience. Buying food from farmers, selling it to consumers is a wonderful experience, and food is fun, it's enjoyable, and it's a wonderful country we have here that we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.